Good morning and welcome back to Coffee with Craig, where we talk about all things Second Amendment advocacy, politics, culture, media, you name it. We're talking about it right here on Coffee with Craig. So please take a moment, like and share this program, and tell your friends about the Firearms Policy Coalition and about Coffee with Craig. Whether you're watching us on Facebook or YouTube, listening to us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, tell your friends. This is the place to be every weekday. Also, please go to fpcgear.com. That's fpcgear.com. It is a very good place to go to purchase Second Amendment swag, whether you're talking about T-shirts, whether you're talking about coffee mugs or hoodies, a bunch of different stuff to show your support for the Second Amendment. And also knowing that every penny that you spend will go right back into the fight for our right to keep and bear arms. So you can support the Second Amendment and you can look good doing it. That's fpcgear.com. All right. Let's get into today's topic. Now, a lot is made, and in particular, as we start talking a lot about these red flag laws that seem to be popping up all across the country, a lot is being made of the issue of mental illness and the Second Amendment, and how we address the issue of, well, they'll say gun violence and mental health. I would more say violence and mental health, and help really to kind of dispel some of the myths relating to the correlation between the two. And how do we, as people who want to fight for our rights, how do we make sure that we dispel those myths at the same time also help to try and make our community safer and keep it safer? And so with that, I wanted to bring a good friend to the program, Mr. Rob Pincus of 2AO, onto the show to talk a little bit about this issue. And so with that, Mr. Pincus, how are you doing today?
Doing great, Greg. I appreciate the obviously all the work that FPC does and the work that you do to help people understand all the issues facing gun owners and have a good time doing it. So I appreciate being on the show.
Excellent. So, as we were kind of catching up, you were telling me about an effort that you're involved in called Walk the Talk. And I want you to share with our viewers a little bit about that program and what your goal is in this particular effort.
Walk the Talk America was founded by Michael Sedini. He's the president of Eagle Imports. He's been in the industry for over 20 years. He's known to a lot of people kind of in the background of the industry. He's not a influencer. He's not out there, as the face of a company or a brand. But he's worked in the industry, and he's the president of a company. And more people are getting to know him, thankfully, through these efforts with Walk the Talk America. And he's been a good friend of mine for a decade or so. He's just a really great, sincere guy. And he was approached. He calls himself like the most non-gun gun guy, in the industry. He's definitely, from a different, background and a different kind of lifestyle than people think of when they think of gun guy. And he grew up in New Jersey. He spent a lot of time traveling the world. He spent a lot of time living out on the West Coast as well. He is a great, sincere guy who sees the problems and the struggles that we deal with in the gun industry, probably from a little bit different perspective than the average gun owner. And he was having a conversation back in May with someone who's completely outside of the gun industry. And the topic that came up, and people can go to WTTA.org and get the background information on kind of how this organization was founded. The conversation kind of turned to mental health. And exactly what you just said, it's not a gun issue, it's a mental health issue, or it's a violence issue. And there's all these intersections and these potential overlaps of the Venn diagrams and what are the real problems. And the woman he was speaking with said, so how do you work with mental health professionals? Like, what is it that you do or the gun industry in general work with mental health professionals to try to solve these issues or answer these questions? And he just drew a blank. He kind of dawned on him all of a sudden he didn't have an answer for that, other than maybe some talking points about, well, this organization and that organization have suicide prevention programs. There really wasn't anything to say. And he got back to his office. He did the research over the next couple of days, realized there really isn't a lot of overlap. There isn't a lot of discussion, dialogue, cooperation going on between the two camps. He did a little more research and decided he wanted to do something about that. So he reached out to me, reached out to a couple other people and asked us what we thought. And, to his report, it was two types of people, either people who got it right away, like 30 seconds in, were like, yeah, brilliant, I'm in, let's do it. And people who just didn't get it. They're just like, well, why would we do that? Why would we want to open that can of worms? Well, they are all gun grabbers or whatever. And overwhelmingly, he kind of knew who to call or who to text or whatever, and he got the right people around him. So Colleen Noir is involved, Kenyon Gleason, the president of NASGW, John Renzulli, very well-known, very well-established lawyer inside of the gun industry. I joined the board right away, and he formed Walk the Talk America. And Walk Talk America's primary mission is to work with mental health professionals to help educate gun owners and the gun community in general about the best ways that we can help one another as peers, sort of best practices around mental health issues, and really just to raise awareness and end the stigma that surrounds asking for help or even talking about mental health. There's really two versions of it, right? One is that typical, especially we see this in the veteran community, we see it in the law enforcement community, the type A, alpha, I don't need help, I can handle it kind of attitude. We want to break that down and let people know, there's nothing wrong with asking for help. Sometimes it's the harder thing to do, to admit you have a problem, right? It's the stronger thing to do, the braver thing to do.
Right.
The other side of that is the fear, right? And it's the fear mongering of, well, they are going to take your guns away if you ask for help. And they just want to use mental health against gun owners as another way to take away our rights or infringe our rights. And that fear mongering doesn't help either. So as much as there's a stigma in the general American population about gun ownership outside of the gun community, where people say, oh, it's the gun, there's just many people inside and outside of the gun industry who put a stigma on mental health, where they say, oh, it's mental health issues, it's mental health issues. The fact is, just like we would say 0.0001% or whatever of legally owned guns are ever used in any kind of violence, people in the mental health profession would say, yeah, but 0.001% of people with mental health issues are ever a danger to anyone else.
Well, I think you hit the nail on the head right there. It is, I always say this, because one of the things whenever I go in and I advocate with legislators, one of the questions that I always get is, well, what are you going to do or what should you do? And I always say, this as a Second Amendment civil rights advocacy group, I am not required to advocate on the issue of mental health or on criminal justice or on all these other issues. But as a gun owner, as someone who believes in and wants our community to be better, I do engage on those particular things. And it's important that we do. As gun owners, we get it. Look, just because there's an issue relating to mental health, and some people, a very small percentage of people with mental health issues, engage in horrific acts, that does not mean, the first thing is, number one, that doesn't mean that I should lose my rights or that other law-abiding citizens should lose their rights. But that also, though, does not abdicate us as members of the community in general from being engaged in talking about how do we address these issues? How do we address the issue of stigma? And the one that I love that you talked about the most was talking about gun owners about, we're people too, although a lot of people wouldn't want to believe we are, but that we have issues and we need help like everybody else.
Right.
And the more and more gun grabbers go after our guns and try and use things like red flag laws and things like that, they take away from, or they put that fear in people. Well, gosh, if I go get help, they might try to take my guns.
Yeah, it's a very fine line. Even just the idea you brought up this issue of violence versus gun violence. Talk about suicide prevention. Is suicide prevention gun violence? Well, if you use the word violence, most people think of an act against someone else, to hurt someone else, purposefully, maliciously, right? And obviously, suicide is an act that is completed against oneself. And obviously, there's mental illness, overlap there. Something approaching 100%. That's not a healthy, normal approach to problem solving. To attempt to take your own life. So that overlap is pretty well established. The correlation between gun ownership and guns and suicide is not well established, although there's a lot of incidental overlap, and there's a lot of different reasons. One of it is that type A personality, the kind of person who owns a gun and carries a gun, and maybe is a more rural area person, a law enforcement professional, a military veteran. They're the kind of person that wants to solve their own problems. They're the kind of person that doesn't want to have to rely on the government or some institution, or maybe even a mental health professional to help them. So that overlap there, it's not a causal relationship. The person had a gun in their life, so they committed suicide. But a person who is more likely to try to solve their own problems in any kind of way is also going to be more likely to have a firearm. America has an incline in suicide rates. It's it's only developed country. The United States stands out as an anomaly in terms of a growing suicide rate in a world where suicide rates are dropping. Now, it's very fair to say that a lot of the third world countries and places where lifestyle issues, homosexuality, for example, is like punishable by death. Like the relaxing of certain things like that around cultures around the world makes suicide less likely in those cultures where they were lagging far behind the freedoms that we have in the US that make people less likely to be driven to attempt or complete a suicide. So the US was ahead of the game, but it is odd that we're continuing to climb while the rest of the world is going down.
Well, the rest of the world, except for maybe, if I understand it, Japan. But I wanted to address one of the things, and one of the things you talked about, you just hit on, and this was interesting. You talked about how there are changes that certain other cultures or countries make, it makes it easier to address issues of suicide. One of the things that I've seen that I think is a big part of the issue in this whole conversation is there is absolutely little to no sensitivity to how does the mental health community and the policymakers create an environment where gun owners or these type A personalities that you're talking about feel comfortable seeking help. Some of it is not necessarily just the people in the Second Amendment advocacy community making changes, but people in the mental health community making changes in order to make it a more inviting and able to make it so that people feel more willing to seek out that sort of help.
Yeah, it's an issue of trust, right? And so that's the issue is when it's it's real easy to distrust or mistrust someone or misunderstand someone's intentions. One of the things we have to be able to do is help each other as peers. So again, Walk Talk America, working with Mental Health America, which is a mental health patient advocacy group more than anything else. They have been around for 109 years as of this February, and their primary mission and focus is protecting the rights of the mentally ill. So obviously there's an overlap, and Mike Sedini actually found them because of a position paper they wrote where they basically said, look, we don't take an issue with guns. In fact, we have some empathy for gun owners because of this stigma issue. Mental health suffers from the same kind of negative stigma that gun ownership does in certain circles in the US. So they didn't reach out to us, but as soon as we reached out to them and said, hey, we get that makes sense to us. Would you be interested in working with us to help reach more people in the gun community? They got really excited about it. So now we actually have free and anonymous screenings right at WTTA.org. If somebody goes there, they're going to see a little pop-up window. They can go follow that. They can get the online screening. Again, it's anonymous, it's free. They can get resources online or be recommended to resources from any of the affiliates, the chapter organizations and the clinics that work with Mental Health America, which are located all across the country. So we're trying to provide those resources within an umbrella, within like a tent of obviously pro-gun, right? Gun industry people who've worked in the industry for decades. We can all squabble over, whether we think this policy or this, what kind of gun is the best kind of gun. But at the end of the day, you can't look at, John Renzulli, Rob Pincus, Colleen Noir, Mike Sedini, and say, Kenyon Gleason, and say, well, I'm not sure if they have an anti-gun agenda behind this. We don't have an anti-gun agenda behind this. So if you trust us, then trust the NSGW. If you trust what Colleen does, if you trust what I'm doing, you trust 2AO, you trust Personal Defense Network. We want you to trust Walk the Talk America. Come in and go through the online screening. You might find out you were afraid you were suffering from something. You go through, you take the online screening test, and these aren't stuff we came up with. This is from mental health professionals. You might, I do have a mild case of that, but it's not as bad as I thought. A lot of people are driven by the fear of even being diagnosed. I see it a lot, like we're talking to veterans, right? We have a lot of people come to us now over the last 6 months and kind of share their stories. We see a lot of veterans who come to us and say, I'm afraid to go talk to somebody. It's been put in my head that, if I get diagnosed with this, or if I get treated for this, I'm going to lose my guns, I'm going to lose my ability to work, I'm not going to be able to, do the things I want to do in life, and I'm going to be judged negatively, potentially even for having asked for help. And that's a tragedy. It's like a tragedy on top of the potential that they are mentally ill because of things they experience serving our country, that they're dealing with issues from that service. So, at the end of the day, we as gun owners, right, and this is a big thing with Second Amendment organization, with Walk Talk America, Rob Pincus personally, we have to be able to look at each other and be able to say to a friend, hey, it's okay to ask for help. You may need help. And maybe right now, having guns in your life isn't nearly as important as getting the help that you need. And that's a hard thing to say. And it's a hard thing to hear. And there's people in the comments who are like, oh, see, Rob Pincus thinks you shouldn't have guns. And there are some people who shouldn't have guns. Like, you didn't know that? right? Sorry, here's the news flash. Some people shouldn't have guns, right? We know that. How do we get them diagnosed? How do we get them the help that they need? You talked about the emergency protective orders, the emergency, what is it? Extreme risk protection orders, right? Laws that we're talking about. They've been shown in studies. A couple of states have had them for a long time. I think there's like 20 that have them now, but there's been a reduction in suicides in the states that have those. So there's an efficacy shown in terms of the reduction of firearm suicides. Now, what's happening is there's a lot of fear mongering around school shootings and spree killings and mass killings, that somehow these things are going to have an effect on that violence that does involve guns from time to time, obviously, but there's no proof of that.
Well, if I could just interject real quick, I think the issue that people have, at least the issue that we have when it comes to these red flag laws or extreme risk protection orders, is the due process nature of them. The fact that you lose your right before you ever get your day in court, and then on top of it, once you do go to court, you are now guilty until proven innocent. I think the idea of being able to this is the idea in general is not a bad idea, but it's also important that we protect due process, because then you start seeing things like what's happened in Florida. When Florida, that within the first 2 months, they had 450 of these orders that were put out there. 400 of them in one county by one anti-gun sheriff. Also, an instance in Vermont where individuals lost their guns, lost their rights because someone related to them said, "I'm going to do the school violence, and I'm going to steal guns from that." Well, that person lost their guns because someone else they were going to steal them. So the problem there's this abuse when it comes to the policy and the process. Government wants us to trust them, but they've proven time and time again that they're not trustworthy when it comes to protecting our rights. So what I love about what you guys are doing is you're not saying this isn't government. This is, number one, it's people who want to address an issue. It's the private community. But even better, it's our own. It's people within our own community who know and understand the fear, know and understand the issues, but want to see people they care about getting help.
Yeah, it's like, what shirt am I going to wear? And I grabbed the Protect What You Love shirt. We were going to talk about this, and part of the Protect What You Love, obviously, is be ready to draw your gun and defend your family if someone comes in to attack them. But there's a bigger part of that. There's protecting yourself, right? There's protecting our Second Amendment rights. There's protecting our fellow gun owners, the veterans, people we've served with, people we worked with in law enforcement. There's a lot to that. And Protect What You Love may not mean shooting ISIS in the face, right? It may just mean holding a guy's guns for him while he goes through a hard time in his life and he gets the therapy or gets whatever he needs. We have to be careful. These red flag laws is such a contentious issue right now. You said in there somewhere, like someone could pull that quote and like Craig said, at the heart of this, it's a good idea, right? And now all of a sudden you're a turncoat, you're anti-gun, you're a traitor to the freedom of America and all that because you said it was a good idea. Well, it's common sense, right? And I'm not even Rob said common sense. He believes in common sense. Well, let's not weaponize, not let them weaponize common sense as a term, right? Things have a kernel of good idea in them. Then you went on to talk about the abuses. The abuses can't be the reason not to try to get to the good, right? So when we identify the good and because we're going to get these things legislated upon us, right? It's going to happen. So we can either take responsibility, be part of the dialogue, not abdicate our responsibility and just be they, them, fear-mongering in the corner, hiding, which to me is a real victim mentality. We need to be proactive and get involved in discussion and make sure that things like due process are there. Make sure that the path to getting your guns back is clearly there.
I can tell you I've been involved in those conversations here in the state of California, and they don't care about due process. They don't care about getting your gun back. I hear what you're saying. The problem is I'm talking about policymakers who are not familiar with issues relating to gun ownership, firearms, who don't care about your rights, how it's actually going to implement. And the problem is many of them, they're so busy on other stuff, not getting engaged, really taking the time to understand these issues. And so as a result, you wind up with policy that is going to be implemented by bureaucrats that winds up running amok. And I hear what you're saying. I'm involved in discussion, We are, but I can tell you, I get to see a red flag law that had full due process, that had any real due process. Because due process that takes after you your rights is not due process.
When you get pulled over for a traffic stop and an officer pulls you out of your car and says you're carrying a gun, put it over here for a second, you just got deprived of your gun rights. There's all sorts of time. So we can't pretend that all of a sudden January 2019 is the first time anyone's ever had their rights taken away without a jury trial, right? Every time you get charged with a crime, every time that you get detained for an interview, you lose your Fourth Amendment, Fifth Amendment, Second Amendment. Sometimes you lose your First Amendment rights at different times, right? There are all sorts of times when our rights are infringed without due process during the process of figuring out what's going on. So we can't pretend that that doesn't happen all the time. The issue here is, and if you've read like the entire federal report on school safety that was just released recently, kind of over the holidays, I don't think a lot of attention to it. Did you read? There's a section in there on the extremist protection orders and a chart that kind of shows everything about the, I think, 20 or 21 that exists, and has everything from like how does it go into effect, how long are the guns taken, how long do you have for a trial. All of those kinds of things. And some of the laws, when you read through them, the officer, which is the executive branch, has to go to the judicial branch. The order has to be issued by the magistrate or by the judge. Then it has to be executed. That's to say that's not a form of due process. That's not due process.
It's not due process when you lose your rights without having the ability to go and defend yourself. In particular, when then law enforcement is then they're given an order, they're given a warning, they're restraining, say, person has been to be a danger to themselves or others, therefore should not be into firearms. That's what they're told. And so when they go to get those guns, you wind up with a situation like what happened in Maryland, where you wind up with individuals who are surprised by law enforcement showing up there, having their guns taken away, and you wind up getting shot as a result of it.
Well,
I'm sorry, man.
After he knew they were cops, it wasn't a surprise. He had a gun. He put it down. Then they told him what was going on, and he decided to pick the gun up and threaten the cops. Maybe there's a reason he was having on him, right? Like that's not a sane decision. That's not a rational decision to reach down and threaten the cops with the gun after he escalated at the door. So I don't, and the guy in Vermont, as I understand it, if it's the case I'm thinking of, he said, "Hey, how about I let somebody hold my guns for me while we figure this out?"
No, it was a different case. It was a middle schooler who said, "I'm going to steal these relatives' guns, and I'm going to go. And me and you are shoot this school, shoot up our middle school." And when the school found out about it, they told police. Police then got the extremist protection order and took the guns away from the people who literally had nothing to do with it except that they were related to this kid. I'm just saying that the government has demonstrated that they have absolutely no concerns to due process or rights. And I'm sorry, until we have a law that says you're going to protect my due process. I'm not willing to give up liberty for the sake of some perceived security.
I'm driving, right? I'm going to go to jail that night. There's no due process, right? Other than what the officer does on the side of the road, and then he takes me and books me into the jail, and I spend the night in jail. I just got deprived of my freedom. If I had a gun, I got deprived of my gun, right? There's obviously privacy issues there.
But at that point, but see, the difference is that point taken into custody. So yes, once you are taken into custody, once you are arrested, then you lose your rights. If you are not taken into custody, no, you do not lose your rights. You are not taken to jail unless you're being taken into custody.
Okay, so now we're back to like the 5150 laws in California, right, where you're going to have an involuntary commitment into a mental health institution. Obviously, at that point, when you're involuntarily committed, you don't have access to the guns either. So,
but at least at that point, a mental health professional made the decision. In red flag laws or extremist orders, at no point in the entire process is a mental health professional even involved in the discussion.
You're talking about before the court hearing.
Not even at court hearing. At the court hearing, you have to actually go and engage a mental health professional because they don't really tell you, how do I prove that I'm not a danger to myself or others? They don't actually tell you that.
Right, and that's some of the work that is being done by like Pirelli up in New Jersey, where he's actually established kind of the criteria for social sciences and behavioral sciences dealing with that issue of firearms and when the police come to the mental health community. So this goes back to what Walk the Talk America is all about, is working with mental health professionals. Because when you said earlier, like, be involved in discussion, you get frustrated going in and talking to policymakers and don't have any idea what's going on. Remember, if we as gun owners go in and we say, here's what we want for gun rights, there's probably that stigma, right? On the other hand, if we go talk to the mental health professionals and the mental health professionals are then talking to or asked by the policymakers, what do you guys think is the best thing? And organizations like Mental Health America are saying, well, we're not about taking people's rights away, especially the rights of people who are actually mentally ill. So we need to be careful here about having that path, right? And that's, again, if you go back to that report, some states have really specific paths for how you get your guns back. Other states, it's really vague. And that's the danger, is if we don't advocate for ourselves and if we don't get allies from the mental health side, it's going to be very hard to do anything except be victims of potential abuse, right? And even some states, there's like no penalty for a false claim. Other states, it's punishable by large fines, or it's a felony charge, or there's an explicit, like, punishable by a year in jail if you have a false request for an emergency or extreme risk protection order.
Well,
so
exactly.
These things are incredibly important because they're here, right? The laws are here. Sitting around complaining about them can go away. And you know this. I mean, Firearms Policy Coalition is one of the most assertive, involved organizations in the country right now in terms of lawsuits and actual activity and actual lobbying. But what I'm seeing a lot of in our community is just, hunkering down in the corner and saying no. And we got to rewind the part where, okay, I get the idea. There's a kernel of good intention here. We need to make sure it doesn't get abused. We need to make sure it doesn't get spun out of control. And also, we see a proven efficacy in terms of suicide prevention issues. So that's really where we need to focus, not the emotional fear mongering around the school shooters that are gonna all be stopped magically because of the red flag laws. I just don't think that's real.
Exactly. So, hey, tell folks a little bit about the organization you work with, 2AO. And how they can follow that work, as well as the work with Walk the Talk America.
Yeah, Second Amendment organization was an organization that was founded after Sandy Hook, and it really was focused on bringing in pro-2A businesses and raising awareness about pro-2A businesses. It was founded as a response to things like, I think in particular, it was like Buffalo Wild Wings. Remember when everybody started having that first round of no guns allowed, gun-free zones in our corporate chains right after Sandy Hook? Well, a business owner decided to go the opposite direction, put a sign out in Northern Virginia and said, 10% off if you have a valid concealed carry permit. We welcome responsibly armed Americans, people who exercise their Second Amendment rights, into our business. And that created a huge grassroots kind of kickback against all the gun-free zones. And the organization grew very, very fast. Over a couple of years, they had over 250,000 people who had signed on to this pledge for their businesses around the country. And it wasn't that was the thing. It wasn't gun shops and gun ranges. It was, bars and restaurants and body shops and laundromats or, convenience stores, whatever. Local businesses who were all saying, we support the Second Amendment. Unfortunately, they hit a little hiccup in the road. One of the larger organizations that doesn't really like other organizations in our community, I think we all know who we're talking about, kind of threw a big flag out there against 2AO and a bunch of other organizations in the aftermath of Sandy Hook and said, hey, let's not get distracted. We're the ones who can do everything for you. These organizations, we're suspect of their intentions and the way they're maybe capitalizing on the tragedy of Sandy Hook, and really threw a ringer at them and threw a wrench in their work. So they hit a little hiccup and kind of went dormant, trying to figure out kind of even how to respond to that. They came to me and asked me if I wanted to get involved with jumping in, taking the helm, and maybe not righting the ship, but turning the ship in a direction it makes sense for today, for the fight we have in 2019. So we spent a lot of time working together. Last year, I formally joined the board in September. In fact, it was announced at the Gun Rights Policy Conference when I was speaking there that I joined the board, and I'm now the executive vice president. And we have a few different missions. There's the business mission, the grassroots mission on businesses. Grassroots advocacy, I think one of the most important things we can do is educate people how to have these discussions with the middle ground American who isn't a diehard anti-gunner, isn't diehard pro-Second Amendment. They really just don't know what to do. And if all they see is one group over here saying, we want to save kids, and another group over here saying, from our cold, dead hands, most normal Americans are going to go with I'd rather save kids than that guy's look scaring me over there. So rather than sort of get back into our corners again, hunker down and say they, we want to make sure that the grassroots advocates at the coffee shop, sitting in the stands for kids' baseball games, we want to give gun owners the vernacular, the talking points that aren't just rhetorical talking points and aren't quoting the founding fathers, but are the practical answers when people talk about red flag laws, for example. Like, not just saying they're horrible, it's just how gun grabbers want to take our stuff, because no one who isn't already pro-gun wants to hear that. Like, it doesn't make any sense. It doesn't, like, they just glaze over. So we have to have better talking points. So grassroots advocacy is a big thing with 2AO. And the other one is ending gun negligence. It's something I've been passionate about for a long time. I spoke about that earlier this year, and it talked about how we need to take responsibility for the fact that, you know, the guy who left the gun in the car where the 5-year-old got the gun out of the backseat map pocket and shot himself in the face at the Wendy's drive-thru last week, that guy needs to be sanctioned by gun owners. And I saw far too many people when that article started getting spread around the internet saying things like, oh, well, now the gun grabbers are going to use that against us. That's not the right response for a responsibly armed American. The right response from a responsibly armed American is, wow, what was that guy thinking? We need to do a better job inside of our community of making sure things like that happen less and less and less until they don't happen anymore. And obviously that then overlaps with things like suicide prevention and preventing unauthorized access and working with mental health professionals and the work we're doing at Walk the Talk America.
Excellent. Well, you know, and once again, I think one thing we can all agree on is that we in the gun owning community, we as gun owners, we need to be a part of the solution. I don't think more government policies, I don't think more laws are the answer. I think it's us, people in the community, taking the time and being engaged in these issues and actually talking about how we work together to address the issues instead of getting government. Because as soon as you start getting government involved, it generally equates to a loss of rights. And well, I don't know about you, but I do know about you. I'm not down for that. So, Rob, hey, Thank you so much for coming on the program. We very much appreciate you coming on. And look forward to having you on again in the future.
Great. Thanks, man.
All right. All right, everybody. Well, that's going to be it for this episode of Coffee with Craig. We very much appreciate you guys tuning in. Please remember to like and share this program. Tell your friends about the Firearms Policy Coalition. We are the home in the fight for civil rights. Got to use them or you're going to lose them. You guys take care.
If you like our videos, follow, subscribe, like, and share.